Κυρίες και κύριοι συνάδελφοι, καλησπέρα. Έχουμε την συζήτηση και ψήφιση της διακήρυξης.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We are starting this evening session. In the first part, as you know, we have the discussion and voting of the declaration. The declaration for the 30 years of the I.A.O. against the new challenges and before of new perspectives. And then we will go on with the special thematic reference to the 30 years of the I.A.O., where we are going to have a first presentation by Kyriakos Moisidis, a PhD candidate who is now making his thesis on the foundation and the journey of the I.A.O. 1993-2003 as a scientific study for the present and the future. This is the topic of his PhD in the University of Athens. Orthodoxy in the New European Reality, the contribution of parliaments of Orthodox states in the framework of the Interparliamentary Assembly on Orthodoxy. Before I give the floor to Mr. Mygdalis, let me say that this session is honored by the presence of Ambassador Amira Antonia, from the General Director of the Committee, High Commission for Religious Affairs in Palestine, and we thank her for her presence. And now I will give the floor to Mr. Mygdalis for certain clarifications on the text of the declaration. Already some remarks have been made in the previous session. Ladies and gentlemen, dear members of parliament, you have received in your files a draft declaration on the 30 years of activities of the I.A.O. This is a declaration that is trying to summarize in a declaratory way, with the wording of a political declaration. It is trying to summarize the activities of the I.A.O. during these 30 years and briefly outline our key principles and inform the reader who we are, what we believe, and tell them that we are going on. Please take into account something that you do know from your parliamentary experience, all of you, that declarations are not easy texts, because our activity is too broad. We do know what a declaration should contain, but on the other hand, a declaration should be short. You cannot have a declaration that is too long, and you cannot have a declaration structured outside the international practices or incomprehensible. So having a 30-year experience with declarations and announcements and resolutions issued after every General Assembly, I remember the following. Each time, the topic we insisted on every time was the problems in the several countries, member countries of the I.A.O. That's what we were always discussing. We were always focusing on the wording, how to say something about the occupation of Cyprus, how to say something about the occupation of Palestine, what wording to use in order to say something about Nagorno-Karabakh and the problems of Armenia. So, please and pay attention, and I'd like to focus on this. we made a very hard effort, and we tried in every possible manner with the Secretary General to use wording, a wording that would be fit for an international announcement, an international communiqué, and without showing that our assembly pays more attention than needed to international events, international developments, which, though, should be reflected in the text of the declaration in a balanced manner, because we didn't want to show in that declaration that our organization promotes, first and foremost, the claims and injustices against some states or against some Orthodox regions. I don't have the words to express this better, but I hope you understand what I'm saying. So please take this into account concerning the wording of the declaration. So based on what we discussed today, and mostly based on what the MP from Palestine and from Sudan have said, the Secretary General considers it would be appropriate to make an addition. Please listen to the addition and let us know if you consider that something needs to be added or removed. Thank you, Advisor. I believe that if we include this addition to the declaration, based on what was discussed in previous sessions and based on what representatives from the Middle East have said, and the colleague from Iran and the colleague from Africa, living in countries where the majority is Muslim, I think that the text will be very, very good. So after, when we say we denounce the occupation of Nagorno-Karabakh and so on, in the second paragraph where we say that we condemn in the strongest terms any form of threat or use of violence against the state of people, regardless, and so on. War or terrorism are destructive phenomena that impede human prosperity. This is part of the document. We should add, moreover, we condemn explicitly acts of sacrilege or desecration or destruction of religious symbols, such as the recent incident with the burning of Quran in Sweden. I think we ought to insert this phrase. This is our duty to truth, and this is also something that enhances the impartiality of our organization. Now, if there are people who wish to take the floor and make other remarks on the wording, on the text of the declaration, please let us know. Okay? There are no remarks, so I think that with this insertion, the declaration is a very balanced document. Now, our colleague from Georgia wishes to say something.
Yesterday, I offered to one amendment when it is first chapter, yes, we denounce the ongoing occupation of territory of the Republic of Cyprus and Palestine. I offered to include here the Georgia, because 20% of Georgia's territory is occupied, and we have more than 300,000 IDPs people. It is fact what is recognized by all international organizations from Euro Union and includes the United Nations. Because the occupation is one of main target of Georgia's and main target of all international communities.
Είναι κάποιος συνάδελφος που μπορεί να έχει αντίρρηση σε αυτήν την προσθήκη?
Is there any colleague who would object against such an addition? If not, we can add, so and say the Republic of Cyprus, Palestine, Georgia,
Ορίστε.
Ναι. Παρακαλώ. Σας παρακαλώ πολύ. Να είναι μια διαδικασία μόνο βουλευτών.
The floor should be given only to members of parliament. So let's not have remarks from people who are not MPs. Thank you. This was a remark from Mr. Mygdalis.
Προχωρούμε λοιπόν με αυτή την...
Okay, then we shall go on with this addition. We shall add Georgia, as mentioned by our colleague. So we denounce the ongoing occupation of territories of the Republic of Cyprus, Georgia and Palestine, the invasion of Ukraine, plus the addition that I mentioned before concerning the desecration or destruction of religious symbols and the burning of Quran. I think we are fine with that. So we will rewrite the declaration with these additions, and let me ask the Assembly if you approve the declaration with these two amendments. Please raise your hand if you agree and approve the declaration. Great. So we have concluded with the organizational matters, and we shall go on now with the second part, the last part of our anniversary assembly. With the special reference to the 30-year course of the I.A.O. So let me invite on the podium the PhD theology candidate in the National University of Athens, Mr. Kyriakos Moisidis, who will present his paper, The Establishment and Course of the I.A.O. 1993-2023, as a subject of scientific study at present and in the future. Good evening, honorable MPs, professors, ladies and gentlemen. On the 30th of June 1993, the day, as we have many times repeated in this General Assembly, in the beautiful place of Chalkidiki, the then Parliamentary Committee for Religions and Orthodoxy of the Greek Parliament organized 30 years ago, in cooperation with the Holy Monastery of Simonos Petras on Mount Athos and the Annunciation of Virgin Mary in Ormilia. So they organized the European Conference on the occasion of the developments taking place in southeastern Europe. More specifically, the invited participants were called to share their concerns on the effects of the historical developments and events of 1989 until 1992. In other words, the fall of real socialism in the Soviet Union countries, the signing of the Maastricht Treaty in Europe, and others. And before we reach the conference itself, it's worth talking about the preparation of the conference, which started 1 year before, in 1992. That was the period when New Democracy was the governing party. The Prime Minister was Konstantinos Mitsotakis, and the Speaker of the Parliament was Athanasios Tsaldaris. The Committee for Religions and Orthodoxy in the Greek Parliament, which was established exactly because of those radical developments in the broader region of southeastern Europe, was receiving all this political input and was perceiving all that was happening in the Orthodox world of the Balkans. However, the events and developments didn't have such a political impact. They had even more a religious or ecclesiastic impact. A world that is seeking its lost tradition finds refuge to the fortress of Orthodoxy, Mount Athos, the holy monastery of Simonos Petra, and another major religious center, the holy monastery of the Annunciation of Virgin Mary in Ormilia. And according to research, we see that world was looking to its church, seeking its Orthodox tradition. So the stance of the abbot Emilianos on Simonos Petra and the late monk Serapion adopt an attitude which shows the Orthodox morality, the principles and values of faith that view the other not as an enemy but as an image of God. So in an environment which is disrupted in terms of politics and with so many social, economic and religious unrests, so in such an environment the parliamentary approach was essential, as well as the political and social consultation in the context of an orthodox formulation of such concerns. So the Greek parliament takes this initiative and, in partnership with the Center Panagia Philanthropini of the monastery in Ormilia, invites here in Chalkidiki representatives from the parliaments of the Orthodox states, representatives of all Orthodox churches and all the Orthodox schools of theology. In that conference in 1993, where the participants were from 16 countries of South and Eastern Europe, the concern was obvious on the faces and the speeches delivered by all. However, within a diversity of opinions and ideas, people from different places and ideologies, one text came out of that conference, the declaration of the members of the conference. This text is very interesting because, among other important issues, it points out in advance and recognizes the role that needs to be played by the participating states and their parliaments towards a common direction. And a leading role is reserved for Greece and Russia in the European Union and the Security Council of the UN, respectively, as members of those organizations, in order to highlight and confirm the key role of Orthodoxy. Moreover, it is understood by everyone that there has to be a follow-up, and they express the will and the confidence that parliamentarians and parliaments that are organized units of people participation will be able to follow up on this project. So 16 months later, the Greek parliament takes again a new initiative. In November 1994, representatives from all parliaments meet in Athens, and the central topic of discussion is the Interparliamentary Committee of Orthodox MPs from the parliaments of European states and its mission, its mandate in the new European reality. And during that meeting, they decided to establish the European Interparliamentary Assembly on Orthodoxy. The president of the General Assembly is elected, and the Secretary General is appointed, Orestis Papastratis, because Stelios Papathemelis is a minister. In Greece, we had the government of Andreas Papandreou. The Speaker of the Parliament was Apostolos Kaklamanis. And in the text of the founding act, there is reference to the mode of participation and representation for each parliament. And there is also mention to the objectives of the Assembly and its organizational structures. So all parliaments that have autonomous, independent, autocephalous Orthodox churches and Orthodox MPs are allowed to participate in theory. And pre-Chalkidon churches are also participating from the very beginning. So according to the rules of procedure of the Assembly that was voted in the General Assembly in Warsaw in June 1998, we see the perfect planning, the perfect balance, the perfect equilibrium that is maintained, and the equal role of Greece and Russia with their permanent participation as members of the Secretariat. And finally, the committees are set up and their tasks are defined. These texts have been the most substantial element for the success of the work that followed in the 30 years. Please allow me to approach the work of the I.A.O. divided in 3 decades that were full of activities and decisions for participation and contribution, but also 3 decades of Orthodox presence in the European and the global parliamentary developments. So in 29 General Assemblies, more than 40 meetings of the International Secretariat, more than 20 conferences and seminars and visits around the world, and other activities, the I.A.O. indeed is moving and addresses issues that concern the society, both the European and the global society, and makes an effort to approach these topics from an Orthodox perspective and always in a political parliamentary space. So the first decade has mostly approached the general topics of the world through Orthodoxy and parliamentarism, and has analyzed the relations of 2 supreme institutions and concepts. And then in the aftershock of the chain collapse of authoritarian regimes, unprecedented competitions and rivalries occurred, and tragic conflicts and civil wars and hostilities. So there was an imperative need to offer good peacemaking services, that is, the services offered by Orthodox foundations and principles of a parliamentary democracy. And this is exactly the role taken by the I.A.O. In tough times, and it managed to consolidate the idea of coexistence and common journey for Orthodoxy and parliamentarism among its members. A typical example is the establishment and the functioning of the Committee on Bioethics and the Scientific Committee on Bioethics, which drafted declarations on the key principles based on the Orthodox tradition on subjects such as cloning, the quality of a fetus, and so on. And then other committees were set up, education, culture, social affairs, which have drafted declarations showing the work that was produced and the interest shown by the I.A.O. on topics that have to do with education, but also the importance it attributes to parliamentarism, the need for education with respect for otherness and solidarity society. So we could say that the first decade was a decade of acquaintance among its members, but it has also served as a workshop for parliamentarism, where in areas of knowledge and politics, the place was sought in order to express Orthodox Christian ideas, such as education, culture, or bioethics. Now, approaching the second decade of action and presence of the I.A.O., this is visible on the leaflets of the parliaments, the first contributions are starting being paid, because until that point all costs were covered by the Greek Parliament. So during the second decade, the Russian Duma starts paying contribution, and even retrospectively covering the costs for the previous years. So the I.A.O. has already been established in the parliamentary developments and in the ecclesiastic world, in theory and in practice. In parallel, it has already presented very special work and has recorded a significant contribution in the development and in enrichment of the relations between Orthodox MPs in any country. In that period of over-consumerism and the challenges and dilemmas, the I.A.O. has left its stamp. It fostered dialogue and adopted understanding, synthesis, and convergence of opinions, because this is the mandate of the I.A.O. Of course, that was the era when two activities started that are still holding today, publications and contests. So we have, for example, a photo contest on the topic Easter in the Christian East and a relevant publication. Then photo contest on the topic destruction of monuments in Christian East. A publication of a volume, Church Ecumeny Politics, dedicated to the late Metropolitan of Switzerland, Damaskinos Papandreou. Really a similar publication, the minutes of a workshop on the Second World War, the Christian View 70 years later, and numerous other publications, and an annual newsletter which still exists. And something more concrete and very interesting, several efforts were made for society and the science to remove from their vocabulary a term that was eventually insulting the human essence, that of tolerance. So let's wonder, what does tolerance mean? What does it mean to tolerate another human being? Eventually, that was one of the major achievements of the I.A.O., to stop the use of this word when we are talking about coexistence of people. Because in a different world, in a more hopeful, more promising world, and in a political, economic and social field of action named European Union, the human face should not be downgraded, because this is what the term tolerance is doing. But we need to respect and accept difference, diversity. This is the word that could replace the wrong use of the word tolerance, as Dean Stamoulis has mentioned. Finally, since the first years of the financial crisis, the I.A.O., during its assemblies, meetings and dialogues, has engaged in topics about the global economic crisis and its impact on society, drawing very important conclusions under the prism of the Orthodox perspective. So, heading to the third decade of activity and contribution, the I.A.O. strengthened its role in the global parliamentary reality with historical choices. And it's worth mentioning here, or rather repeating, some historical partnerships that upgrade the role of the I.A.O. and enhance the need for its existence in the parliamentary dialogue. First of all, the ongoing relation and collaboration with the Interparliamentary Union. And then, after relevant proceedings, the I.A.O. signed an MOU with the Pan-African Parliament at the seat of the Pan-African in Johannesburg in May 2011. Also, memorandum of cooperation with the Parliamentary Assembly of Russia-Belarus Union, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Eurasian Economic Community, PAM, the PABSEC, and so on. The effort to sign an agreement and cooperation with the Parliamentary Union of the Islamic Conference member states seated in Tehran is also extremely interesting. The agreement was initialed here in Athens, but it has not been completed, unfortunately, because of objections by the Turkish parliament. And nowadays, there is an agreement in progress with the World Islam Union seated in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia.
This period, the I.A.O, apart from all the above, also organized an international parliamentary dialogue conference in Beirut in cooperation with the Lebanese parliament on the topic unity and polymorphy and basic principles of freedom for Christians and Muslims in the Middle East. And let's also mention here that negotiations are ongoing with a group of experts of the presidency of the Republic of Lebanon in order to create an observatory for religious persecutions, in order to record them, make them public, and then resolve them by means of legal and peaceful measures. And of course, there were meetings and cooperation with the ICLN and the Focolari movement. Let us also mention here that the I.A.O, a parliamentary agency throughout its course, mentioned the need and brought it to the fore in order to create a particular relationship with the local Orthodox churches, thus enhancing inter-Christian and interfaith dialogue. And also relations with the primates of churches. Finally, what has particular weight is the cooperation of the I.A.O with the Ecumenical Patriarchate of Constantinople and the Ecumenical Patriarch of Bartholomew. As the Church of Constantinople acts and moves with flexibility, conveying the Orthodox message of ecumenicity, this is exactly what the I.A.O does, defending individual rights, religious freedoms, and international law. Furthermore, two persons of the ecumenical throne that marked with their presence the I.A.O and participated in its founding are the late Metropolitan Damaskinos Papandreou, Metropolitan of Switzerland, and Metropolitan Geron of Chalcedon, Emmanuel, who started working with the I.A.O when he was an archimandrite. If one thinks back to the events of the last 10 years, he will see that the third decade is that of great difficulties. The I.A.O had to literally walk on a tightrope, and facts like the world global financial crunch, migration, COVID, the Ukraine war, and the ecclesiastical implication after the Great and Holy Synod in Crete are only some of the things that happened in our area and in the humanity at large. Let's remember the extreme positions of some ecclesiastical circles concerning vaccines and the prohibition of crowding in spaces of cult. And all of these also problems that surfaced after the Council of Crete. The I.A.O. positions on these subjects have been clearly expressed in texts and show the positive political thought of the organization, but also its very clear position around the unity of churches. However, the I.A.O. having as a basis culture, orthodox and human principles and values, does not get implicated in the interests of worldwide interest or in differences that do not fall in its own field of competence. Today, as a researcher, I can assure you that the I.A.O. will always be an object of scientific study, and today I can refer to some data, to some truths that will lead us to some assessments that you will agree with, I am sure. First of all, the 30-year course without any problems of coexistence between Greek and Russia, and there are two different worlds, let's not forget that. Greece belonging to the West, Russia with its own particularities, and all the formerly communist countries shape a landscape where it is expected that there would be frictions, racial differences, and conflicts, inequalities and competitions, and a very different political course. Issues such as globalization, development of new technologies, migration, the pandemic, and others form a very difficult ecclesiastical landscape that made the members of the I.A.O. to take a difficult path, which, however, always ended into unanimity, to unanimous agreements. But there is one deviation from this rule when, in the assembly in Moscow in 1999, Russia asked for the denouncement of the USA for bombings of Yugoslavia, and Greece then, by the mouth of its then Secretary Papathemelis, suggested not to vote on this subject, but to be contented with the repeated denouncements that they had already issued. And the Assembly finally accepted the Papathemelis proposal. Second, a Parliamentary Assembly by nature is an agency of political power and authority, and is composed of persons that take part in the exercise of power. However, power, as you know, hides different dangers and risks. When there is a show of force, then the power becomes a means for the cloaking of human insecurities, and however, there has never been an abuse over these 30 years. There were no frictions, there were no contentions, and we can speak about a cooperation and a coexistence that is an example to imitate, to emulate. I appreciate that for the first time in an organization with so many different persons, facts, conditions, situations and policies, there is a real understanding, mutual understanding, Christian love, if you will, and cooperation and the putting aside of differences and selfish behaviors. And there is unity, there is equilibrium in the decisions and choices. There is a peaceful and harmonious coexistence in the name of common values with with decisions taken responsibly and with wisdom. And this is the spirit that is going to reign during the fourth decade, we are certain, in the face of modern challenges such as the artificial intelligence and resilience and anti-systemic movements, etc. Actions such as contests of art and other actions and publications and so on and so forth really contribute to the maintaining of our very rich, unique cultural heritage. Without any objection, it was very important that the I.A.O. undertook to bring forth the issue of the conversion of Hagia Sophia into a mosque in order to raise awareness and alert the international community. And of course, there was a lot of admiration for the originality and the high quality of the volume Hagia Sophia, the churches of Hagia Sophia in the world. There is no doubt that this is a very symbolic movement, and this symbol of Orthodoxy brings to the surface events, refers to teachings and attracts the brightness of civilization, and also shows clearly the truth of the religious developments and these developments that leaders that are clueless as to history ignore. All these thoughts, ladies and gentlemen, converge to lead us to the general conclusion that there is a future for I.A.O. in the world of Europe, with its multiple challenges and crises, be it economic, energy, geopolitical, and others. However, the I.A.O. may be the only voice today that fights against central decisions in order to maintain this Europe that we live in and that we dream of for the Europeans of the future. The I.A.O. is trying to maintain its foundations unalterable, and these foundations are its spiritual values. The cornerstone of the European family is Christianity. T.S. Eliot, Nobel winner, said, "I don't believe that the civilization of Europe could survive should the Christian faith disappear." And this conviction, I have it not because only I am a Christian, but because I have studied social biology. If Christianity were to disappear one day, then the whole civilization would disappear as well. I shall close this presentation, ladies and gentlemen, repeating the words of another Nobelist, the American writer John Steinbeck. He wrote that man has a choice, and it is the fact that he has a choice that makes him a man. And what I mentioned today here is all choices of humans, choices of people who thought, reflected, planned, and implemented, led by principles, values, and faith and love for the other. And these choices made them into real people with a capital P. These people are the MPs that for the last 30 years and from the very first day have supported and served the idea and the goals of the I.A.O. in the international community. Vasilis Korachais, Thanasis Xarchas, Vasilios Papadopoulos, Kalliopi Bourdar, and many others. And of course, the soul of the I.A.O., Stelios Papathemelis, and all those who have worked until today. There are those who worked also for the idea and the organization and contributed in an important manner in the maintaining of the interparliamentary and extrovert presence and action of the organization. Athanasios Angelopoulos, these are all university professors, Vlasios Fidas, also the ambassadors, Vasilios Vitsaxis, Ioannis Grigoriadis, he is a journalist, Spiros Alexiou, a writer and journalist, and the hieromonk Serapion Simonopetritis that I mentioned before. I left for the end, last but certainly not least, Konstantinos Mygdalis, the very experienced and effective Konstantinos Mygdalis. The historian of the future is going to write his name in golden letters for his contribution and protagonistic role in the course of the I.A.O. And there is still a lot for him to do. Thank you.
We thank the candidate PhD, Mr. Kyriakos Moisidis, for his detailed and comprehensive speech. He recalled all these 30 years of the activity and contribution of the I.A.O. Some of the younger ones or the newer ones may not have been aware of all these activities, and I'm glad because through his presentation he helped us realize that we are all writing history through our activities in the I.A.O. So may this realization be our incentive, our motivation for doing better work in the future. Your PhD, your thesis will be very interesting, Mr. Moisidis, and we are really looking forward. You mentioned the names of many of those who were present in the founding assembly during that conference that started in Ormylia. Some have passed away, such as the late Serapion, the well-known journalist in Kathimerini newspaper, Spiros Alexiou. But there are others. There are many people who managed to join us tonight. And we will be very glad to hear their empirical relation with the I.A.O. So here I shall give the floor to Mr. Mygdalis, who is our institutional memory, because he is going to moderate from now on this empirical discussion.